A graphics card like the GTX 1070 might well be the bare minimum for PC gaming in 2025, but there's one way to find out for sure, and that's to test it at 1080p to find out how good or how mid the GTX 1070 really is. I'm just kidding, I absolutely love this graphics card, but I can't beat around the fact that its modern relevance is kind of not there. Anyways though, back in 2016, this graphics card was absolutely fantastic. The value was brilliant, it also had 8GB of VRAM, which back then was quite a lot, and its 1080p and 1440p performance was phenomenal. But I found this palette model for just £54 on an eBay auction, and I thought it'd make for a very good video idea to find out how good this GPU actually is. And there's only one way to find out, and that's to test it at 1080p. I tried 1440p and it was not very good at all. So full HD it is for this graphics card, and we've also used the latest Game Ready driver at the time of testing, which is coming to an end for this graphics card very soon. Nvidia are dropping them. Anyways, all testing has been done on the Ryzen 9 7900X testing PC, which all of the specs can be found in the description if you want to check them out. With that being said, let's see how it gets on. Let's start off the benchmarks with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This game, highly optimised, runs very well. And on the medium preset with ultra textures, because of the 8GB of VRAM, we can do that. We're still getting pretty decent performance at just below 60 FPS on average. Yeah, if you do some settings tweaking, you'll easily get this above that magical threshold. Anyways, the 1% lows are looking, well, fantastic here at 47. Warhorse, absolute brilliant developer. They know how to optimize a game. God of War Ragnarok, just like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, performs absolutely brilliantly, and in fact, it's getting on slightly better than Kingdom Come Deliverance. On the medium preset with ultra textures, you're going to be getting 60 FPS on average, but with a fantastic 1% low of 51, so there's absolutely zero problems here. Flipping that scenario on its head though is Stalker 2. This Unreal Engine 5 game isn't, well, particularly brilliantly optimised in any stretch of the imagination, and even on the low preset with high textures we're getting below 30 FPS. Is this playable in my opinion? Not particularly. I would probably just stay away from this game if you've got a GTX 1070, but if you absolutely had to play it for some reason, it will start and give you more of a Xbox One type of experience, if that makes sense. Star Wars Jedi Survivor runs on UE4 and it's not a particularly polished game, but to be honest the story is absolutely fantastic, and yeah, the technical problems with this game do hold it back in my opinion. You are getting around 40 FPS on average with a frame time that isn't the greatest I've ever seen, but it's still technically playable even on the low preset with high textures. So yeah, the 1070 isn't the greatest in this game, but you'll get a better experience than like Stalker 2 for instance. Now we have Cyberpunk on the medium preset with those textures set to high. Performance is really not that bad. You're getting around 55 FPS on average with a 1% low of 44, so the frame rate's relatively smooth. But I've noticed in Cyberpunk, anything pre-Turing doesn't really get on too well, so that's something you've got to factor in right there. But you could always lower some of the settings down to, well, the low preset and you'll get above 60 FPS anyway, so it's not really make or break. Just like Stalker 2, Oblivion on the low preset with high textures doesn't really get on too well. It's not even getting 30 FPS here, which is not very playable if you ask me, especially in 2025, and the 1% low at 20 means the frame time is not the greatest. But to be honest, it's kind of playable if you have to play the Oblivion remaster, but I think you'll be better off with the original and do some graphics mods and you'll get far more performance, and I think you'll get a better experience overall as well. So yeah, in modern-ish AAA games, native 1080p in a lot of them is a bridge too far. In the Unreal Engine 5 titles like Stalker 2 and Oblivion, we're not even getting 30 FPS on the 1070, which is not particularly the greatest outcome. But in the case of the Unreal Engine games, they're not particularly the most optimized of games, so that is kind of fighting against the 1070's favour here. But if we look at some more polished titles like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, God of War Ragnarok, and even Cyberpunk, the 1070 gets on pretty decently here, and we're not even running like the bare minimum settings as well. So if you need slightly more performance, there's a bit more room to adjust there. Where you won't be needing any settings tweaking is in Fortnite, because on the performance API, yeah, you're getting quite a bit of performance here. 469 FPS on average at 1080p is absolutely brilliant performance, and to be honest, I think your CPU is going to be more of a limiting factor here. Anyways, the frame time is still looking, well, very good by Fortnite standards at 360, so across the board here, phenomenal performance. Even in Counter-Strike 2, a game not particularly known for its great 1% lows, the 1070 is still performing pretty decently here. For the average frame rate, more than 300 FPS will do quite nicely, thank you very much. And for the 1% lows, yeah, 153 is not the greatest sort of number we can get here, but it's not the worst, so yeah, all things considered, the 1070 is getting on pretty decently. Now switching up to some older AAA games, and The Witcher 3 is, well, nothing short of amazing on the high preset. With DirectX 11, you don't need 12 if you're not using any of the DX12 features. Anyways, 81 FPS on average, great performance right there. Frame times are also looking pretty decent for The Witcher standards at 60 FPS. So if you wanted to play this game, which admittedly is a bit of an enhanced edition of a title that launched in 2015, the 1070 will play perfectly fine. Skyrim Special Edition launched in the same year as the 1070, and it really goes to show because, yeah, we're getting the engine lock right here. 60 FPS on the Ultra preset is fine, there's absolutely no problems with that, and in fact, you could probably go up to 1440p and get the same frame rate as well. That's how much performance we had left in the tank. The 1% lows naturally are quite close to the average frame rate at 59, so yeah, there's absolutely zero problems across the board in this Bethesda classic. So when you stick to the games that the 1070 can actually play quite well, you're going to be getting a very good experience. Esports games in particular run, well, nothing short of perfectly fine, because Fortnite got more than 460 FPS on average, which is great, and Counter-Strike got more than 300. Which is brilliant. Admittedly, the CPU matters quite a bit more in these games, and the 7900X is not a CPU you'd naturally pair with this, but we are looking at the 1070's performance, not a system from 2016's performance, if that makes sense. Anyways, if we want to play some older AAA games on this, like The Witcher 3 and Skyrim Special Edition, I think the 1070 is going to be perfectly fine. I've said that like 500 times in this video, but yeah, the point still stands. This graphics card is going to be fine today in these games, and it will be fine in 5-10 years time in these titles. So depending on what you're playing, the GTX 1070 still has some life left in it, but maybe not a lot. If we look at the modern AAA gaming performance, it's not particularly fantastic, with Unreal Engine 5 games in particular not performing too brilliantly, even at native Full HD, which is not that great. And with its driver support ending this year, yeah, I don't recommend this game for newer titles. However, if you plan on playing esports games, and mainly older sort of AAA releases, here is where the GTX 1070 tends to shine quite a bit. If we look at like The Witcher 3 and Skyrim Special Edition, which launched in the same year as this graphics card for the latter, yeah, performance was absolutely great on like the high or even ultra preset. And then when we look at the esports games, yeah, you're getting a very high refresh rate experience here, and I suspect the lack of drivers won't hurt its performance or compatibility too much. So this leaves me with the question of, should you buy the GTX 1070 in 2025? And I think for most people, no, probably not. Mainly because it's just not that great in modern games, and its driver support is being dropped, and it doesn't even support ray tracing or like DLSS or any of that. I know quite a lot of you probably aren't too interested in those two features, but it won't start games like Indiana Jones, which something like the RTX 3050 will. But as a budget card for older games for around like 50 odd quid, Yeah, it's not a bad GPU for that price. You're getting 8 GB of VRAM and fantastic 1080p performance in these titles, and maybe even 1440p as well. So I think for around that price, it's still quite a decent deal, especially that this thing doesn't really consume too much power, as it's only got a single 8-pin PCIe power connector. But if you want a more modern graphics card, potentially with a bit more VRAM, the Arc B580 might be a solid option for you, and you can watch how it performs in a video up here. With that being said though, I'll catch you in the next one.